A really epic thread from Carlos Osuita. Alyssa Milano tweets, I'm on a Zoom fundraiser with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I'm filled with hope. I feel like this must be the ticket. They're an amazing team, the right team for this moment in history. Hashtag Biden Harris 2020. Carlos responds, Al Milano gives me the opportunity to talk about Hollywood fantasy versus reality. Don't kid yourself. Al really thinks that Biden and Harris will defeat Donald Trump. Hollywood knows nothing about history. Easily, the worst battle in human history was the fight between the Germans and French at Fort Vaux, June 2nd through the 7th, 1916. First, we see the gamers version. Just watch until they're out of the fort. All right, I'm going to pump this out right quick for you guys. All right, so this is Fort Vaux, and this is the gamer's interpretation of what Fort Vaux looked like. Note exactly how spacious everything is. And we're going to get to the actual diagram of Fort Vaux in a second. So let's just enjoy this for a couple minutes. All right, so now you see how spacious it is. Okay, so now that you've seen how spacious it is, here's a short tour of the actual inside of the fort. And I'm going to narrate that because this is going to be really important for the rest of this thread, just to give an idea of the Battle of Fort Vaux. All right, so here we are outside of the fort, and let us enjoy. Okay, so we're going to go inside. Fort Vaux was the site of a tremendous firefight in June of 1916. It's one of the French forts that anchored the French line at Verdun, and it was not until June that it was actually taken. On June 2nd, the Germans cut off the fort and isolated it. And from there, 6 days of protracted combat would continue until the garrison eventually had to surrender. So for the first couple of days, they were able to man the outer defenses of the fort. By the last few days, the Germans were actually able to force entry into the fort and hand-to-hand combat in these kinds of narrow fortifications. These walls, you'll look around here, these walls are built inside the galleries. They're not original. They're thrown up hastily by the French. All right, so you get the basic idea of just how cramped the interior of Fort Vaux was. Okay, so Carlos did something not a single historian has ever done. All right, we're going to switch back into Carlos's voice. I did something not a single historian has ever done. I read all the German and French accounts and created the real story. This is my schematic of the fort. All right, this is Fort Vaux. The fort had a dry moat all around it. The French had built hardened gun positions at 3 of the 4 corners. Note where I'm pointing. Automatic cannons covered the moat so soldiers couldn't cross. Here's what the Germans did. They fought their way to the fort and stood on top of the upper left and right gun positions. So there and there, I guess. Then they lowered horrendous weapons called fire tubes. When you pulled the lanyard, they emitted a 7-foot jet of flame and a cloud of smoke for 90 seconds. The French gunners were wearing gas masks, but the fire tubes consumed all the oxygen in the gun positions. The Germans did this for 2 days. On June 4th, and a fire tube attack, the Germans lowered dynamite and blew up the guns. This allowed men to cross the moats. There were gun turrets on the roof of the fort, so German artillery knocked them out. Then, engineers with picks and explosives broke into the fort through the roof, and the 2 knocked out gun positions in the corners. The tunnels, marked F and H, were 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. So they're done with these locations, F and H. These tunnels are marked off with dotted lines, and they are 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. Just imagine 3 feet of horizontal length, of horizontal width to get through. Okay, that's how cramped we're talking about here. The French had set up machine guns behind sandbags in the tunnels every 15 feet. On June 4th, the Germans cut the power to the fort, so all the fighting was done in pitch blackness. Machine guns, hand grenades, and fire tubes in pitch black concrete tunnels 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. The Germans entering the fort crowded into the Germans in the tunnels, pushing them forward in the darkness. On June 5th, the order was given to bring flamethrowers. Each flamethrower was operated by a 4-man squad. Here we have a picture of such a flamethrower. We have it in German and French. Flammenwerfer, lanceur de liquide enflammé. Look at the length of the jet. From here, okay, so that's the height of a guy. There is the nozzle of the flamethrower, and there is the length of the jet. The tunnel battles devolved into hand-to-hand combat with picks, daggers, rifle butts, and teeth. In one assault on a French machine gun position, the German engineers took the position but suffered 100% casualties. The survivors emerged from the fort in smoldering uniforms. The French had run out of water on June 4th. And by the evening of June 5th, there was so little oxygen left in the fort due to smoke and concrete dust that the kerosene lamps wouldn't light. For 2 more days, the fighting continued in pitch blackness. The French retreated into their armored barracks. R on the map, pointing right here. There's R, okay? Armored barracks. German engineers began drilling holes in the concrete above them, putting in dynamite and setting it off. The roofs of multiple tunnels collapsed. When the French could no longer breathe, they launched a counterattack from their barracks. They used hand grenades and machine guns, but the flamethrowers drove them back. So many Germans had gone insane that the use of flamethrowers and fire tubes was then prohibited. It was the height of summer. The piles of corpses began to putrefy. The men fought in darkness, smoke, dust stench, and slime. When the French began jumping from the windows of the barracks to commit suicide, Major Sylvain Eugène Raynal surrendered. The German crown prince insisted on taking his surrender, refusing Raynal's sword and pistol, which he was allowed to keep. Raynal had been wounded and hospitalized 3 times before taking command of Fort Vaux. He was allowed to stay in the French army despite having to use a walker. After being taken prisoner, Raynal kept his sword and pistol even in the POW camp. Because of his health issues, the Germans transferred him to Switzerland after he promised not to go back to France. After the war, Raynal came home and lived to the age of 71. As a final note about reality, the Germans had used nearby Fort Douaumont as a staging area for the assault on Fort Vaux. As they prepared for that assault on Fort Vaux, there was a catastrophe. A flamethrower platoon had paused for lunch. This was May 8th, 1916. Remember, the assault on Fort Vaux was June 2nd through the 7th, 1916. So this is almost a month beforehand. They stacked their flamethrowers and concentrated charges in the corridor. This is a concentrated charge. 7 grenade heads wired together to explode simultaneously. German stick grenades had a safety cap that you unscrewed so that the lanyard fell out of the handle. When you pulled the lanyard, it operated a friction fuse, like a big match, that had a 7-second delay. Because they were pros, the flamethrower troops took off the safety caps of their grenades, so the lanyards had already fallen out. The grenades are in a bag on the lower right corner. Note here, there it is. You can see the lanyard and the pull knob hanging out. So, an ordinary Joe walking by the piles of flamethrowers and concentrated charges knocked one onto the floor and stepped on the knob. Since he didn't know anything about grenades, he picked up the concentrated charge while standing on the knob, setting off the 7-second fuse. He put the charge back on the pile of flamethrowers. The concentrated charge exploded, rupturing all the flamethrowers and sending a torrent of burning oil through the fort. The oil hit the depot where they kept artillery rounds, and the whole interior of the fort exploded. A total of 679 men were killed. As the smoke blackened survivors staggered to the surface, the men on the walls thought they were the dreaded African colonial troops. They opened fire, killing dozens. There was no way to put out the fire. When it burned out, the Germans simply walled off the area where 679 men were killed. Today, it's an official German military cemetery in France. So the next time you think you have it bad, give a little thought to Fort Vaux and Fort Douaumont. It's called perspective. I'm not saying you have to not feel upset, but take control of yourself. We have no problems, not in comparison.